This is the Final Word Cricket Podcast, Season 17, Episode 29, with Adam Collins in London, Jeff Lemon in Melbourne for Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm. A weekly edition of the show, recording first thing on a Monday morning, my time at least, which is a little bit unusual for us. We tend to ease into the week, but we're bursting into it this time around. Jeff, as I said, you're in Melbourne. We're at the very end of the Southern season, thus still Season 17, until we get to the Shield final, when we'll click over to the UK season, and in turn it'll be Season 18. More about them and that part of the world later. How are you?
Season 18, that feels like a significant number. You know, it's a significant birthday. It's a birthday when people's parents stack the garage full of mid-strength and hope that not too much damage will be done. So maybe it will be the same for us. I don't know. Season 18 will be big. There'll be a large England season. It'll probably go through till October. There'll be a Women's World Cup in September. I'm not sure what season that'll fall in. Anyway, we're close to the end of 17, but not quite there yet. It's been doing that thing in Melbourne where it was like 30 degrees overnight, brutally hot, and then the next day it was about 10 degrees and freezing, and we're not quite sure if it's the end of summer and the start of autumn. Where are we? Don't know, but we'll figure it out.
Season 18, Fred Fanning, always relevant in footy terms as well, for the most goals kicked in a game, and I say that because it feels like in the same way footy season 2, because we're a couple of rounds in. There was that quirk where Hawthorn had 8 points before 12 teams had played a game, which was quite enjoyable after the convincing win over, well, I say convincing, handy win over Essendon on Friday night. I showed real restraint, Jeff. Normally when we beat Essendon, I am intentionally as obnoxious as I possibly can be on social media. But I thought, you know what?
That's your peak. That's the peak of obnoxiousness from you.
Has to be. Yeah, you're duty bound. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to leave them be. They can enjoy their trip back to their aerodrome thing in Tullamarine and, past glories, fading as they are. They can enjoy that, and we'll think about September, as we're entitled to do. But yeah, footy season in swing, but also kind of like cricket season here as well, recreationally. I've been asked to play a game this Saturday, which is the 22nd of March, which is definitely not cricket season here yet.
No.
But playing a T20 in Hackney somewhere on Saturday, which is appreciated given how much I've been netting. But yeah, I had a look, and that Sam Robson stat where he scored a first-class 100 in March, which was the first to ever do it back in 2012 when Middlesex were playing one of the university games. It used to be they used to use it as the warm-up round, and he made 100 against Durham's MCC University in the March the 31st of 2012. So I'm not saying the game I'm playing, I have no idea who it's for, will have anything close to first-class status, but it will be nice to feel as though we're doing the thing that we like doing so much, which is getting out there and playing the game.
He played a game against a Durham university, and that has first-class status. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, Durham had MCCU status. So 8 of the universities, because it used to be Cambridge and Oxford, there was a decision taken that was a bit, having the two most prestigious universities having first-class status and ignoring all the other institutions. So for about, I don't know, mate, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, about a decade, there were 8 centres of excellence that the MCC helped co-fund with the institutions. And so Leeds, Durham were 2 that jump out.
Right.
I can't remember any of the others right now. But
and
yeah,
now, have they revoked it from all of them now? Okay.
Yeah, they've revoked.
Which would have
stops.
been more the solution. World Series cricket, no first-class status. Durham University, first-class status. Come on.
Yeah. So the first, the varsity game was the only one that had it, and then it was the other unis, and then I reckon 4 or 5 years ago. They still play that round, by the way. That'll be a game that they play in the season. So Yorkshire will play against Leeds, but it won't have the status that it did for a while there, which included the 100 that Sam Robson made, who's gone on to have an outstanding career. That's it by way of intro. We've got quite a lot to get through, which is the form at this time of year. Shield round, which isn't quite complete, the final Shield round before the decider next week in Adelaide, which will be worthy of a conversation in and of itself. Saudi Arabian T20 comp to make more room to save Test cricket. Wouldn't have thought so. We'll see on that. And England wrap, a few more dramas going on in Scotland. There's cricket being played between Pakistan and New Zealand's men after the Champions Trophy. Isha Guha has conducted a rare interview with Virat Kohli, which quite a bit came out of. The WPL final was over the weekend. They're preparing for England A's women's tour of Australia, and that America's qualification. I'm going to save that to last. It's a great little bit there coming with the America's T20 World Cup Women Qualification Tournament that's been held in Buenos Aires over the last week, which you'll enjoy some of the results that played out there. So heaps to tuck into, Jeff, but instead of any of that, we're going to actually start with a former Australian Test cricketer who's been on the show before and done an interview with us during the pandemic, who has had his day in court.
Yes, Stuart MacGill has been found guilty on a lesser charge. He was up for a couple of charges in relation to a cocaine deal. Taking part in the supply of a prohibited drug was the charge. There was a further charge of the supply of a commercial quantity of a prohibited drug. So he didn't get found guilty of that. Basically, this boils down to he introduced his personal coke dealer to his brother-in-law, who claimed to be an even bigger and better coke dealer. And the two of them set up a deal, and apparently doing that means that you've committed a crime yourself. He was found guilty of it. His position in court was that he'd made the introduction but didn't know what they were going to be doing with that introduction, and essentially the prosecution case was that the deal was sufficiently advanced when it happened that there was no way that he couldn't have known what the contents of it were going to be, because people don't generally have $330,000 in cash or a kilogram of cocaine lying around when they spontaneously rock up to make a deal. So that's basically how it's panned out. I've just found it a sad kind of story that a player who we have had a lot of admiration for has been as sort of going through this thing publicly. I think I feel sorry for him more than anything else. It seems like a shitty situation to be in. I'm very unconvinced about the punitive nature of anti-drug policy, and basically the fact that drugs being illegal is the thing that creates most of the problems around the drug trade and around criminal involvement and that sort of thing. But that's the situation he's in. My read on it is that it means it's a relatively minor charge. He hasn't been sentenced. That'll happen later. So probably he comes away with it, I'd guess, with a fairly light sentence for, it may not be a custodial sentence. It may be more on the suspended sentence or good behaviour bond kind of side of the spectrum, I suppose. But yeah, it's just a weird story all up, I think, and so I thought it was worth running through it a little bit just so that people might have a better understanding of what's going on. Basically, where this meeting, so this is, weirdly enough, this is about 3 months after we did that interview, which you could go back and find in the feed, where Stu MacGill was quite emotional when he was speaking to us, and there seemed to be a fair bit going on in his life. He said in court that he was using cocaine quite frequently and was buying small amounts multiple times a week, and his brother-in-law, or effectively his partner's brother, was often bragging about his drug contacts, and so he made this introduction with the dealer that he was buying small amounts off to see if he could get a better supply, basically, and that's gone ahead and happened. The puzzling thing about this is if this bigger deal has gone ahead, why didn't a jury convict on the more serious charge? But there's a lot that's weird about this deal. Firstly, they're, according to the police charge, they've got this dealer who they're not naming. They've got the brother-in-law who they are naming. They're saying that deal was $330,000 for a kilogram of cocaine, which doesn't make a lot of economic sense, because that's, $330 a gram buying in bulk. And when you buy in bulk, prices go down. That's the way it's supposed to work. So unless they were planning to cut this amount of the drug with a bunch of other stuff to bulk it out, it wouldn't make sense to pay that much for that quantity. And then it gets weirder, where apparently these guys conduct a couple of deals, and then the drug dealer rips off the brother-in-law by giving him a fake bundle of cash instead of the real bundle of cash, and then absconds with the drugs. And that's when Stuart MacGill gets kidnapped, because he's held responsible for the fact that this guy's ripped off the other contacts in the arrangement. And so they've kidnapped MacGill, threatened to torture him and brutalise him. They stole his phone, and then somebody wearing a balaclava runs up to the News Corp office and throws Stuart MacGill's phone through the front door of the News Corp offices and then runs off. At which point, News Corp hand it over to the police, who download all the data off it and put it on a USB stick, and then lose the USB stick, and then go to trial with none of the information off his phone. having then given his phone back to him, at which point he's wiped everything on it. So they've got metadata of messages that he sent, but none of the contexts. They've got metadata of phone calls, but so there's no text information. It's very New South Wales Police that you're like, in the 2020s, they're like, one USB stick, we'll pop it on there and we'll lose it, and this will never come up again.
Yeah, it does sound very New South Wales cops on a number of fronts. I won't speculate any further than that. Yeah, look, on the MacGill bit of this to begin with, he was quite emotional. That's the defining memory of mine about that interview, that it didn't take much for him to be really, really feeling his answers. You don't always get that with, and sometimes that can be what makes an interview. Maybe it did. I don't know. Did it make the interview that he was quite emotional at different points? I'm not sure. But I spoke to him quite a bit either side of the interview as well. And that seemed to be his, he's an emotional guy. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But it does. I'm not surprised to hear what you say there about the fact that he was involved in taking a lot of drugs around that stretch of time. That wasn't context then, but makes sense now. Wider point, zooming out, endlessly fascinated by the proliferation of cocaine in Australia. Yeah. Like, as in the, I don't know when, a decade, 15 years, I don't know, but it feels like it was an exotic thing to a certain extent in Australia for the time that I lived in Oz, which ends about a decade ago. And now it is just so commonplace. And I don't think that's a time of life thing either. I don't think that's because we're older and people have greater access to money. My instinct is that that's just a community thing, that it's been, I don't know whether it's greater supply. I have no idea about the economics of how the import-export trade work on that front. But it is of interest that it seems to be now just considered a thing that's relatively normal, when I genuinely don't think it was as normalised as this a generation ago.
No, and it might have been a bit of a Melbourne-Sydney difference to that degree, but I would say, when I was first going out, go back 20, say, as a teenager, 25 years even, it was very, cokeheads was a very pejorative term. If you're out and about on a weekend, the cokeheads were the ones who were aggressive, who were annoying, who talked all the time, who talked about themselves all the time. They seemed like boring, irritating people who were most likely to try to punch your head in. And it didn't seem that prevalent. There were a lot of people on a lot of other drugs, but they weren't doing cocaine necessarily.
They were on cheaper drugs, right? Because cocaine was seen as something that was out of range of most people who were.
And it was vastly expensive. I think what happened is that the price of other drugs came up to meet cocaine. I think that basically drug dealers were like, well, if we can sell coke for, say, whatever, $300 as it might have been back then, well, then we can sell other amphetamines and so on for prices creeping up closer and closer to that. And so eventually it got close enough that it didn't make that much of a difference. And I think the street price hasn't gone up with inflation as much as it might have if other things over a 20-year span would have gone up a lot more. So I think there is a bigger supply. But yeah, there is a cultural influence of cocaine in Australia. I agree with you, that's much stronger than it was 20 years ago.
This isn't meant to be the import-export podcast, although it was worth mentioning in the context of MacGill. But we will move on to the cricket, and we'll go first to the Sheffield Shield because, as we said, we're nearing the end of season 17. But that means we're nearing the end of what's been a compelling domestic season for both the men and the women. So this is a weird round, Jeff, where there's a day-night game going on. There's a game in Perth, and we're Stumps Day 3 at the game at Adelaide, which is the one that, well, from a South Australian perspective, has no bearing on who will make the final. Very much does for Queensland, though. So, as I say, Stumps at Day 3, South Australia went huge, having already locked away their berth and locked away the home final with their win over Victoria last weekend. South Australia, 614 for 7 declared. Very rare. You see a 600 plus in the Shield these days because teams are looking to move the game on. Well, South Australia don't need to. They can do as they please. So I like the story of Conor McInerney. So he makes 142. He was averaging 20 in 24 first-class games before this, half a dozen 50s. But getting a big 100 opening the round before the Shield final, they can't drop him. He's going to go into a Shield final in form, having had a modest at best career to this point. Alex Carey, back in the side straight away, gets 100, having returned from international duty, and an excellent 100 for Australia in the second test against Sri Lanka. And Jake Lehman, back-to-back, an unbeaten 100 in the chase at the Junction, then 130 not out in the first innings against Queensland. So Yeah, 144 overs they kept Queensland out in the field for. Queensland, so they need to win, I should add. Queensland must win. So even though they're second, other teams will overtake them unless they win this game, barring some remarkable confluence of events. So Queensland then reply with 370. Wildermuth gets 104 in 90 balls because they need to keep the game moving. So it's the prerogative.
They also need bonus point runs. So I'll come to this when I chat about the Victorian game a bit. But there is a way that they can stay ahead with the draw, Queensland, because they desperately needed runs above the score of 200 before the 100th over, and I reckon that's why Wildermuth was going nuts.
Right, and that's after Jimmy Pearson got 128. So, and always been a favourite.
Get him in the test side. Where's Jimmy Pearson?
Similarly, Michael Nisa.
More wicket keepers.
Nisa gets 68. At classic Nisa, they go for heaps of runs, and he got 1 for 40 from 20 overs, which is very on brand for him.
And then made runs batting at 7.
Yeah. Then 3 for a piece for, Nathan McAndrew, Henry Thornton, who we spoke about last week, Lloyd Pope, who's been a match winner this year. So there's been an outstanding all-round team effort from South Australia to get to this point. 2 for 66 at stumps on day 3. McSweeney, the captain, and Sanger both there. They already lead by 310. So with 3 sessions to play, Queensland would need a miracle to win the game. They'd need to, bowl out South Australia in an hour and then give themselves enough time to chase near enough to 400. So it'll require a scenario along the lines of what you're describing there, Jeff, to get Queensland into the big one.
Yeah. Well, in a way, South Australia can kind of decide who they're going to play to some degree, but which I'll come to with the Vicks game in a second.
Okay.
An important bit for Queensland, because they're second, New South Wales are third, but New South Wales are getting stomped into the dirt by Tasmania, who are sixth and can't qualify, but they're thrashing New South Wales at the moment. So, and it wasn't based on the first innings. Tassie started with 331, decent score, but not dominant. Jordan Silk makes 112. Tim Ward, who we've had an eye on, makes 64. Sean Abbott and Ben Dwarshuis come back from Champions Trophy duty. Abbott 6 for 99, Dwarshuis 3 for 77. And then New South Wales get knocked over for 186. Dwarshuis top scores as well with the bat after taking wickets, makes 40. Curtis Patterson second best score with 33. And it's Slug Webster naturally taking 5 for 44. Riley Meredith 3 for 44. Gabe Bell 2 for 19, extremely tidy. And at the moment, they're just cruising on ahead. Tasmania, they're 383 for 4, and they finally declared at 500 and something, 520 odd ahead. They
must be
absolutely punished New South Wales, who have a little bit of time to go this evening, and then they've got day 4 tomorrow to try to survive.
Yeah, right. So, that is interesting as far as that takes New South Wales out of it.
New South Wales are out, yeah.
They're gone. There's no way they can get it because, they could draw from there, but they can't chase 500 in a day. So,
and they got no bonus points batting on their first innings.
Right, right.
And they didn't get, they would have had some bonus points from wickets, but not enough to make a difference. So they're sunk. But then you get to Victoria, who are motoring in the West at the Wacker against WA. So Victoria didn't look like they were going to be on top. They made 197, but then they bowl out WA for 186. So that was Callaway 52, Hanscom 48. Corey Roccaccioli took another 5 for 67. And then Will Sutherland, you got Sutherland, Moody and Siddle, but it's Siddle 3 for 10 for Peter Siddle. Such Peter Siddle kind of figures, who knocked over WA cheaply. And then they've been making big runs in the third innings. Campbell Callaway's been doing most of it. He's still there, 151 not out.
First 100.
335 for 8. Currently, Victoria still going. They're 346 runs ahead. So the way that, if my maths are on here, if the Vicks win, they get 6 points for the win, right? If Queensland lose and Victoria win, done. Queensland are currently 4.31 points ahead on the Shield table. Queensland bonus points, they'd get 0.4 of bonus points for the wickets that they took before the 100th over. They'll get about 1.5 bonus points for runs, and they'd get a point for the draw. So they'd effectively end up at about whatever that is, 7 and a bit points ahead. And Victoria will have a full bonus points for wickets, but they didn't get any bonus points for runs. So if Victoria win and get the bonus point, they'll get 7 points. If Queensland draw but have the bonus points they've already got, they'll stay ahead by like 0.3 of one.
So we're confident that Queensland got
the.
So we're confident with the bonus points that Queensland acquired.
Pretty sure
on the batting side.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I'm bad at this
Interesting.
Stuff, I'm pretty sure that's right.
No.
They made about 150. They were on about 350 by the time they hit the 100th over. So that should be about 1.5 bonus points.
So I mean, it's a shame that Victoria, they must have gone 4 or 5 innings in a row where they didn't make 200, including the first innings in that match in Perth. And they finally click, but there's no bonus points in the second dig. So had they made
if they'd made
300 plus
instead of 180, then they would have. Then they would qualify with the win.
197 as well. So all right, good to know. Campbell Kellaway top scoring twice last week and 100 here, so another very clear stepping stone for a guy of some pedigree. And Victoria, look, if they don't make the final, it's they will, I'm sure, acknowledge the fact that it's the 3 games in a row they dropped. That's the reason, not for what's happening this week around the country. No. They lost control of their own destiny. They were in second, I think, at that point when they started stinking the joint out with the bat. So, that's all fun and games. The final won't be played at Adelaide Oval. Now, we talked a lot about this last week.
Got excited for 2 days.
Yeah, and look, I'm now a bit more measured in my opinion. When I saw the statement come out, I'm like, footy wins, fuck that. Like I saw Todd Greenberg's angry statement, quite punchy from Todd. First public statement as the chief executive of Cricket Australia. I'm not conditioned to chief executives being so strident in their. I mean, often they will be in an interview or sometimes in a press conference. Very rarely in a written statement, but here saying we are disappointed that South Australia has been prevented from hosting the Sheffield Shield final, and then essentially. Alluding to the fact that they've been denied by footy and thanking Malinauskas for his advocacy and all the rest of it.
Adelaide Oval would have been the most appropriate venue.
Yes.
An extremely compelling case to host the final at Adelaide Oval. March is an important month for cricket, including the Sheffield Shield and Premier and Club cricket final. So it's territory marking. He's going, March is still ours. Like, sure, you might have brought the footy season opener closer. It was weird the other night. I went to see Cam Fink's movie and Tony Wilson's movie at the Nova the other night because I thought it'd be nice to see it on the big screen. Yeah. And I popped a couple of doors down to the Green Man afterwards for a pint, and it was weird that the footy was on. It was weird that it was Hawthorn playing Essendon, and I was like, this just doesn't feel right. It's like barely even the second week of March. We've just had the Labor Day long weekend. It's not supposed to be on now. You know what's coming though, don't you? You mentioned Labor Day. Labor Day should be for water skiing on the Yarra. The Labor Day weekend, Birdman Rally on the Sunday, water skiing on the Monday. Coming to a schedule near you is a full round of AFL on Labor Day weekend. You can guarantee the usual voices who talk of these things. There'll be a blockbuster on the Sunday night as a public holiday. They'll start on Thursday. Public holiday Eve. Thursday through Monday. Exactly right. So that territory grab you're referring to, and the culmination of it will be a Labor Day Monday game, and it'll be terrific for those who have no interest in cricket, having some space to breathe in March. But it'll, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, in the mid-90s, the AFL season routinely started in April, and now it could well start in the second weekend of March, when traditionally Victorian Labor Day has been held, that public holiday. So, opening weekend out of Victoria. But because that didn't go so well due to the cyclone in Queensland. Now they're looking to change it up, and I agree. It doesn't feel like footy season, other than the fact that the games are being played, right? So, but just on this, because now there's an acceptance that football season does start in March. It does make it hard for cricket. Stuart Fox spoke on Jared Waitley's program about this last week, before the decision had been made. And his view from an MCG perspective is you can't really do it because the legal risk that you run with the turf. So he kind of explained that if a player, hypothetically, had a bad head knock on the turf with grass that isn't as long for an AFL game as it typically is, there might be legal recourse. I mean, it's hypothetical, of course, but I can understand. Is the grass really going to make a difference in a head injury case? There's a difference in. I think it also goes to the hardness of the surface relatively. So what would have been required is the grass to have been at football length, I guess, or the turf to have been at football softness, maybe, for the Sheffield Shield game, and that's where they weren't able to quite square it. So it's clear they had a crack through that process, but
ultimately the status quo prevailed, and the Shield final will instead be played at Karen Rolton Oval, which is sad from a cricket perspective, because what they were proposing for Adelaide Oval would have been a terrific thing. But we move on, and I suppose there's a precedent there now as well, which is a bit frustrating for future seasons.
But I think also that bit of territory marking from Greenberg is significant in one way, in that when you've lost an argument, you can still try to set yourself up to win the next argument. Or when there's a position where you don't have quite a strong enough position and you know it'll go against you, if your position's slightly stronger in a different arena the next time around, you might be better placed to end up with the result you want, that sort of thing. It's a long-term game running a sport like that, I suppose.
We'll have the Big Bash, and this will never be how it's resolved, of course, but, the other side of it is the Big Bash does eat up a lot of the Australian summer. And if that were a smaller window, then they could resume the Shield earlier and the final could be played earlier. None of this is perfect, right? It's like most things in sports administration. It's just how much of the bad outcome are you willing to cop? So the fact that they've got these secondary venues in each state now, the prison in Sydney, in Brisbane, Allan Border, which has been used for multiple Shield finals, the Juno in Melbourne, et cetera, and of course Adelaide's got Karen Rolton
playing at the Wacker right now.
Doesn't compromise footy at all. So, yeah. Jeff, before we go to our first break, and we got heaps to get into after it, especially the Saudi Arabia story that broke during the week.
Yeah, this one's significant.
Yeah, our show's brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers.
Maurice Blackburn, let me tell you something, Adam. Let me tell you something.
Go
because
on.
We're talking about superannuation insurance. We're talking about the needs. We're talking about the fact that sometimes insurers are less willing to come to the party than perhaps they should be. I went to visit a friend the other day whose house had caught fire about 9 months ago. There was some electrical wiring, caught fire in the bathroom wall cavity, spread into the roof. They were lucky to wake up and realise what was happening and get out of there and get the fire brigade in and all the rest of it. The fire, because it had started in the wall cavity, it wasn't visible. The damage wasn't visible until you pulled the panels off the bathroom walls. So when the insurance assessor came around to look at the house, they looked in the bathroom and went, "Oh, those walls all look fine." And they went, "Unburned area, no insurance assessment necessary." And then handed this over to my friend, who's like, the house was on fire. There were flames coming out of the roof. We had a fire engine pumping like thousands of litres of water into the hole in the roof where the flames were coming out. I'm pretty sure there is some burned area. And the insurance company was like, "Well, it looks fine to me." And then, yes, I was able to have a look once they pulled the inside of the wall panels off, and the entire thing is a horrific charred mess. And they were fortunate to get out with their lives. So the point that I'm making here is insurance companies sometimes comically unable to actually pay out on insurance policies. And if you are finding yourself in that situation with your superannuation insurance, where they should be covering you if you're injured, if you're ill, if you're unable to work for whatever reason, then that's when you go to Maurice Blackburn, because they know how the law works and they will sort it out.
It's important to know what your entitlements are, and you could do worse than getting in touch with them and finding out what your current policy permits you to have, because you just don't know. None of us know. That's the reality of life, right? So you might be precluded from working for any number of reasons that have nothing to do with what you have done, but life's twists and turns and so on, which is not, a lot of it's quite grim, right? Like the reality is what we're talking about here is often quite sad, often almost always quite sad, but best to know where you stand. And Maurice Blackburn's Lawyers, in the event you require accessing that insurance to the people you want on your side, in your corner, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm. Most of their work is done on a no-win, no-fee basis. Search Maurice Blackburn Super Insurance to learn more, an organisation we are most proud to be in association with. On the final word, we'll take a break. Back in a minute.